Hello and welcome to the Drucker TV Book Corner, where we hear from the authors shaping management thinking today. My name is Josie Guptara, and I'm the author of Business Storytelling From Hype to Hack. Do you hate making mistakes? You may have to rethink that. In a fast-moving era, businesses are going to have to increase the number of experiments and inevitably the number of failures. If that makes you wish that there were greater tolerance for failures at your organization, then our guest's new book is for you. Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well. Turns out, failure is a noble art. That's the argument of Amy Edmonson, the Harvard Business School professor renowned for her pioneering work in psychological safety. It's also an argument that is taking the management world by storm. In fact, Amy, you just got back a few days ago from Thinkers 50, where you were named the #1 thinker in the world for the second time in a row. So it's a great honor to have you back on the show.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be back.
Now, of course, you've been on the Thinkers 50 list since 2011, climbing up there. And it's great to have one's work appreciated, of course. But does it come with any sort of sense of a burden of responsibility?
I think that's a fair way to put it. Yes, there is a burden of responsibility, certainly to be a role model for aspiring thinkers and academics especially, and also for not, to pick up on the theme here, for not making any kind of gross mistake that will reflect badly on the organization.
Right, well, it's just as well there's a lot of meat to the bone, and you have, of course, the new book that people can dig into. Now, as I was reading up on your position, and I'm going to read this so I don't make a mistake, something stuck out to me. Your chair was established to support the study of human interactions that lead to the creation of successful enterprises that contribute to the betterment of society.
Correct.
Now, as humanity, we're doing a lot of failing. I don't know if we're learning from it. Can you tell us about any developments which are, where society is getting better? Give us hope, Amy.
I think you're right. Our track record of learning from failures is not spectacular. But it's certainly not something we don't do either. I think virtually everyone is aware of the need to learn from failures and mistakes. And by the way, I do make a distinction between failures and mistakes. Failure is an encompassing category that describes any outcomes that were undesired, right? That were, in many cases, the opposite of what we had hoped for. Mistakes only refer to deviations from best practices in familiar territory. Right? It can't be a mistake if you're a pioneer. Right? If you're in new territory, no one's ever been there before, and you're trying something to see what will happen, to see what you can learn, it's not a mistake. It could be a failure, but it's not a mistake. So I think part of our challenge, part of the reason why we have an uneven record in terms of learning from failures is that we're allergic to them. Right? We have a natural aversion to failures. We'd rather succeed than fail. We don't want to look at them. We'd rather sort of move on. Okay, that didn't work. Let's go forward. It's a great phrase. Let's go forward. Well, let's go forward with more knowledge. Every time we have a fail, whether as a company or as an individual, you can think of that as an investment in the future. And if you've already made that investment, you ought to reap its rewards, and its rewards are the lessons you can take away from it. So my hope, with this book and with the research I've done on this topic over the years, is that we can help people do a better job of learning from failures, more on that in a moment, of preventing the preventable failures, and of engaging in more of what I call intelligent failures, or the right kind of wrong, which really means more experiments, more smart experiments. And I think a crucial thing to understand, and what most people don't really appreciate, at least not deeply enough, is that intelligent failures, the kinds of failures we want more of, not less, are in new territory, so there's no other way to get the knowledge you want. They're in pursuit of a goal. You've done your homework. You have good reason to believe it might work. And then finally, and so importantly, they are as small as possible. Right? They're no bigger than they have to be to get you the lessons. And once you start thinking about them that way, you realize, why not? Right? Let's experiment more, but let's make sure we're not experimenting in a stupid way. Let's make sure that we aren't doing something that will endanger lives, or that we aren't doing something that will cost more money than we can afford. Right? So we take safe, smart, right-sized experiments. Quite often we're wrong, that's a failure. Sometimes we're right, that's a success. But either way, it's valuable new knowledge.
And that's the bridge to your earlier work, of course, and continued work in psychological safety. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you, Amy, because I'm feeling psychologically safe right now, so I'm going to take a risk and speak my mind. I am going to make a bold prediction. Right Kind of Wrong will be your most successful book. Do you want to know why?
Yes.
Well, of course, it's brilliant, because having read it, but there's something else as well, because I am also in marketing and that sort of thing. Do you know what the best-selling genre of books is?
No.
Romance and women's fiction. And do you know what it's often all about? Mr. Right and Mr. Wrong.
Well, that's a very good point.
So if nothing else, I hope that some of our audience will have that little hook, and they'll think of your book the next time that they're in the bookshop.
Well, you know, I do have a couple of stories of blind dates in here too,
Really?
believe it or not, right? So that's
lots of great stories.
Yeah, and
in
a
there.
blind date that does not work out well, that's an intelligent failure, right? And we need them. We all, or blind dates or other kinds of dates, anyone in search of a life partner is very likely not to get it right the first time, right? That you meet someone in high school and you spend the rest of your life with them, probably not.
There you go, folks. You can even benefit with dating advice from Professor Edmonson. But my being facetious just now does have a purpose, because some people might think that there could be such a thing as too much psychological safety, right? So how do you strike the balance between coddling versus giving permission?
I'm hearing that a lot now, this idea of too much psychological safety. And I think that worry comes from a slight misunderstanding of the construct of psychological safety. So psychological safety is not coddling. It's not even comfortable, right? It's permission for candor. So in a sense, it's a recognition of the need to be and permission to be uncomfortable as part of learning, right? As part of risk-taking. So when you really appreciate that this is about believing you can speak up with a concern, a question, a risk, a failure in a timely way so as to prevent us from, throwing good money after bad or worse, harming people, then you realize it's never going to be easy, right? It's never going to be easy to speak up candidly, but if you are in an environment where you believe it's expected, it's how we do things around here, that's what is meant by psychological safety. And I just don't see how you can have too much of that, unless it verges into rudeness. But I think that's another construct. Right?
What do you do if somebody keeps on bringing up, let's say, irrelevant stuff?
You give them feedback. Right? Nobody wants to be ineffective. Right? Nobody wants to have people rolling their eyes because they keep bringing up irrelevant stuff. So they need and deserve your feedback. And that's often a difficult conversation, but it's one that's worth having.
That's a very valuable distinction. Thank you. As is the different types of failure, I think that's very freeing. Of course, we still all do want success. So can you dig into more, why is it more important than ever that people fail and fail fast?
Well, I think that it's more important than ever because we are in a more uncertain, more interdependent, more complex environment. Both our lives are being led in that environment and our companies are being managed in that environment. So there is much less opportunity to just get it right the first time, right? To have a beautiful master plan and expect it to unfold as expected. So the need for sort of fast experiments at a safe scale, again, is greater than it has ever been.
That brings us to the topic of this year's Drucker Forum, creative resilience. And resilience is often seen as something quite passive. We weathered the storm, we survived. What is the role of planning then? Can you plan to learn? You started answering that question already.
Yes, I think the role of planning, apparently Winston Churchill said that plans are worthless, but planning is invaluable.
Right.
And I think that's is essentially the idea, which is we must plan. And I think we must recognize that our plans are hypotheses, not predictions. And as long as you treat them as hypotheses, then you remain very, very alert to the data, or to the data of your experience, to the things that the market or your employees or your customers are telling you about what's working and what isn't. And then you're able to make both smaller and larger pivots as needed.
You've convinced me, and your book, I'm sure, will convince any readers. But what can someone do if their boss just isn't on board with this whole risk-taking and failure thing? How would you persuade that boss, or how can an employee persuade their boss?
Well, you just give them the book, of course.
There you go. That's what I was waiting for. It's the plug. Is there any particular one story or one study that you would recommend people share with the boss if they don't want to read the book,
right.
God forbid?
No, that was a little bit of a playful answer, but a more serious answer is I think it's about often calling attention to uncertainty or novelty or both, right? And it doesn't have to be in a lecturing way, but just when you're sort of saying, wow, I don't think we've ever done a project like this before. You're sort of calling attention to the fact of its uncertainty, right? To the fact of our need to mutually learn as we go, right? So it's in a way, I'm talking about being very sort of rational and science-based, right? Let's be clear about the nature of the work we're doing. Now, in some cases, we're doing things that are, in fact, very well understood. And in that case, our job is, as best we can, sort of adherence to spec. Right, doing an excellent job at the repetitive aspects of the job. I mean, I think Zeynep Tan's amazing work on great jobs often are in that context. Not entirely, but where people can find it that they have the support to do the very best work. Now, work can range from more routine to utterly novel. No matter where you are on that spectrum, you need the support to do the very best work you can, as closely as you can to sort of rational scientific principle.
So it's about having conversations and helping people to understand this really is a strategic choice in terms of the culture. Individuals are making mistakes every day as organizations, hopefully learning something as a result. How can that knowledge be scaled across the organization?
It's a great question. And let me clarify it, because I don't think each and every one of us makes mistakes every single day, but there's probably someone in our organization making mistakes every day, making a mistake. And so I think there's really two important categories. One is making sure there's psychological safety so that people can speak up quickly, when they've made a mistake, because the bigger mistake is to let a small mistake spiral into a larger problem or failure. And then the other is to ensure that people have the training, the support, the permission to ask for help when they aren't quite sure what to do, that they need to minimize mistakes. A big part of this book is not just, have more intelligent failures and do better experimentation, but please adopt the best practices that are out there, as mundane as they may seem, to prevent preventable failures, right? To follow the best practices for avoiding what I call basic failures and complex failures.
You've got a chapter on systems in the book, and you use a lot of stories to illustrate your points, which of course I love. The story of the wine merchants sticks out. How did you find these sorts of illustrations?
I'm sorry, do you mean the beer game or the
the French?
The Veuve Clicquot. So how did I find these stories? Well, it's a combination of books, articles.
Your own work, of course.
My own
case
work.
studies.
Many of the stories are from my own work, my own field work, my own interviews with managers and others. But the story of Veuve Clicquot, the storied champagne brand, came from a marvelous biography about Barbe Nicole Ponsardin Clicquot. And it's just, I recommend the book. It's a pretty dense historical biography, but it is a great story of success that is born out of failure after failure after failure, nearly all of them intelligent.
And I can also recommend a great book. It's called Right, Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well. Amy, thank you so much for another inspiring conversation.
My pleasure.